Hey, everybody. Welcome to our panel on books, authors, and genre evolving from Silicon Valley. I'd like to introduce, first I'll start with myself. I'm a writer. I'm a journalist. I've been writing forever and a day for the New York Times. I started writing about tech in 1983, which was the year before the Apple Macintosh was introduced. So before a lot of people were born. And I've written a bunch of books. One of them is a history of the internet, which I think is the reason that I was asked to moderate this panel. It's called Where Wizards Stay Up Late, The Origins of the Internet. And it's a cult classic. And what else can I tell you about myself? I think that's it that I can think of. So now I'd like to turn to our panelists. And I'm going to start with Carole Stivers. I will read. Hello, Carole. I'm going to read your bio that you so graciously sent to me. Thank you so much. Carole Stivers came to Silicon Valley from Cleveland, Ohio via Urbana, Illinois in 1980. Her near-future science fiction novel, The Mother Code, is not set in the Silicon Valley of today. We'll get to that later. Though technologies developed in the Valley do play a role in the book, and important scenes do take place in a future San Francisco. I'm kind of getting chills just reading that. Rather, after a 30-year career in medical diagnostics, Carole considers herself a product of the Silicon Valley spirit, one that begs us to step outside our own narrow bounds. So that's Carole. Next, we have Joan Gelfand, who I've known, I have to say, for many years. Welcome, Joan. Joan Gelfand is a poet and writing instructor living in San Francisco. She's the author of 3 poetry collections, which is how I mostly know Joan, through her poetry, a chapbook of short fiction, and the Amazon #1 bestseller, You Can Be a Winning Writer, The 4 C's of Successful Authors. The recipient of more than 20 writing awards, Joan is a member of the National Book Critics Circle, President Emeritus of the Women's National Book Association, and a poetry judge for the Northern California Book Awards. Her work has appeared in the Huffington Post, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Rattle, Pank! And many national and international literary journals and magazines. Extreme is Joan's debut novel, and Extreme, which she is going to hold up, has just been published, and we'll get Joan to talk about it very, very soon. Next is Ryan Southwick, and here's what he sent in as his bio: Silicon Valley veteran for mission-critical medical startups, and author of the Z-Tech Chronicles epic urban fantasy / contemporary science fiction series. So I was feeling like I hadn't had like my dessert, like that wasn't enough. So I went to your website, Brian, and I found this. So there's a book. So this Z-Tech Chronicles series, which we'll get into a little bit more, I hope. This is the little plot summary of the book titled Zima Origins, which, I mean, this is like, this was so over my head. So here we go. There it is. Zima's entry to society happens faster than she'd planned when a tragic accident leaves Kappa injured and Zima unwelcome within Z-Tech's protective walls. Alone in San Francisco's Mission District, and with few of the social skills most people take for granted, Zima braves the streets in search of the home she's never had. And then there's a nice blurb from In Detail magazine, an epic urban fantasy blended with science fiction that will capture readers' imaginations! ! So this is going to be a great panel. And the first thing I want to do is apologize because I made a big stink about changing the title of the panel. At first, it was The Emergence of Fiction in Silicon Valley. I said, no, no, no. We've had literature about Silicon Valley forever, starting with Tom Wolfe's The Tinkerings of Robert Noyce, which was all about the semiconductor industry, which when I was teaching journalism at UC Berkeley, I would make students read this because it was such a wonderful example of nonfiction and how it captures Silicon Valley. And that was I think from 1983 in Esquire magazine. And then this is where I sit corrected. Then I started thinking, wait a minute, when I insisted that the panel be changed from the emergence to the evolution, which is what you see now, actually it turns out there hasn't been that much fiction about Silicon Valley. So I kind of have egg on my face about that. However, I will say that I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Werner Vinge's work. Yes, maybe. I wrote a profile of him back in 2001 for the Times. He's a fabulous science fiction writer who came up with probably the most famous first cyberpunk fiction short story. It's kind of a novella, more of a novella called True Names in 1981. Absolutely fabulous a short story that gave you a sense of kind of Blade Runner-ish, but I think kind of much better. So what I'd like to do, now that I have corrected myself on just how much fiction there has been out there, it does seem, and then I did a quick Amazon search of fiction based on Silicon Valley, and now in the last few years, I have to say there's been kind of a ton of it. So, Joan, let's start with you. Why don't you talk about, you look startled. Yes, you are on this panel. Why don't you start
Sure.
and tell us about your book and what it is that you were capturing, what essence of the Valley that you felt you were capturing?
So Extreme takes place in a Silicon Valley gaming startup. So right away you have the gaming world, and also we meet some very scrappy young founders. So that's a pretty iconic Silicon Valley startup recipe, right? You learn pretty soon in the book that the code that these founders have built is not going to hold up. And so again, I'm coming at it from what's it like in the startup world? But of course, this is pre-COVID. So of course, everybody's in the office as opposed to what we're doing now, all remotely. There's a lot of themes in the book that I think are relevant and kind of on the table right now in Silicon Valley, like women in tech, the authenticity of startups versus the commercialization, when a lot of times when a VC comes in and a really cool idea gets kind of thwarted and derailed. So yeah, I'm coming at it from what's the startup world like in the 2000s? What are the players like? What are the tensions, especially between the scrappy youngins and the VCs and the adult supervision and the seasoned executive who come in to run the company? So that's my angle.
That's interesting. It makes me think that mostly what we've seen from is from TV, and so it sounds like what a lot of what you've done, like the show Silicon Valley. It sounds like you were describing kind of some of the characters and the sensibility and the tone, which you've put in the novel. And your protagonist actually is a woman.
Yeah. The feedback that I've gotten is that the book is a little more true than the TV show. There's some real vicissitudes that go on backstage that, I think the gist of the show is just to keep it more humorous. I'm not so sure this book is so humorous, but one of the lighter notes in this book is that the game that the company is developing is for extreme sports. So that's definitely a subplot that is lighter than the dramas of the company. You have skateboarders and surfers and mountain bikers, and one of my characters is training for a triathlon. So I bring extreme sports into the book as well, which is a big part of living in the Bay Area too, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Carole, we're going to leave you for last because yours is kind of a little more complicated. And so Ryan, I really want to know what on earth the Z-Tech is. And so tell us all about your work.
Okay, sure. So the Z-Tech Chronicles, for the most part, it's an epic urban fantasy series. So over the course of the series, it is not just confined to San Francisco, but Angels in the Mist occurs predominantly in San Francisco, right up actually around the Embarcadero. Of course, it's a slightly alternate universe. So there's a factory there called the Z-Tech Factory, which if you go there, you won't find it. But it encapsulates the protagonist is a woman named Anne Perrin. So she's a waitress who it's amazing, I think, how many people who are in San Francisco and work around San Francisco aren't actually in tech and maybe don't even like it. They're working around it. They're working around these people. She's one of those. And she ends up getting involved with this really high-tech organization called Z-Tech. And Z-Tech is... I've been working in tech for a while. You look at any startup, or actually most companies even, right? Their biggest goal is to automate, right? That's how you scale. That's how you get to, the numbers that you need and the number of sales that you're looking for and stuff like that. And so Z-Tech is a company that's taken that to the nth degree. They've become one of the biggest electronics manufacturing in the world, and they have like 7 employees because they have just automated everything in a way that nobody possibly could. And so in a lot of ways, the series is not only an exploration of, wow, this is like, every CEO's dream, to have a company that is just, you push a button and it goes, but seen from the eyes of somebody who's in a lot of ways new to that world. Even though she's grown up around it, she's never been in it. And a lot of the challenges that she has trying to keep up with some of these folks as well. And of course, it is an epic urban fantasy, so it is, it's super science. There are some paranormal elements in there as well that are a little bit life-threatening, unfortunately, to the protagonist. So,
And how many have you written?
So the first book, Angels in the Mist, is already out. It was released a few months ago. And I just recently released Zima Origins, which is it's a novella that takes place before Angels in the Mist, but should probably be read after. And it follows one of the characters through the Mission District. And I guess rather than there's a little bit of Silicon Valley in there, but a lot of it really is exploring the rich culture of the Mission District and some of the art and just personalities and things like that. Because the Mission District is a really amazing place if you've spent any time there.
Yeah, I live right next to the Mission District.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. Carole, so this is intriguing. So tell us about the Mother Code, which is not set in the Silicon Valley of today.
So it's a near future science fiction, which takes place. It starts in 2049, and it starts in Washington D.C. It moves to Los Alamos, and it migrates, I would say, to San Francisco. And in the end, most of the scenes take place in the San Francisco Presidio. And most interestingly, I thought at Fort Scott, where Starfleet Academy is famously filmed and located. So I did a lot of research actually about the Presidio and the surrounding areas and the history of it. Anyways, I guess when I gave you my intro, which basically talked about me as a product of Silicon Valley. I came to Silicon Valley in 1980. I went to Stanford as a postdoc, and there I found out, I'd come from Illinois where, professor would have a great idea and they'd go, great, I can write a grant and support a lot of graduate students. And that was their mindset. And I came to Stanford in 1980, the mindset was, I'm going to change the world with my technology, and I'm going to have a spin-off and make a lot of money. And I didn't like it, to tell you the truth. I didn't think it benefited the students at the time. But that was what was going on in biotech in 1980, 81, 82. I was there through 1983, and lots of spin-offs and professors wanting to start things. But for me, as a scientist, working, I guess I'm not sure I ever would have turned to writing science fiction if I didn't live in the Bay Area, because you're so surrounded by really creative people. You can learn about all kind of areas of science outside your own area of expertise. And so we have Palo Alto Research Center, the lecturers there. You can go to Computer History Museum in Mountain View and watch lectures. You can go to Stanford and watch lectures, and you're kind of immersed in science and surrounded by really super creative people. So I think that spurred me on. And then the writing community in San Francisco and in the Bay Area in general is really burgeoning right now. So having a lot of friends who not only are in tech, but are writing creatively. And so that really helped me.
So that's great. You haven't said a word about the book, though.
So it's about a young, so it starts with a pandemic, which is not a great thing to be coming out with right now. But it's a man-made pandemic caused by a biowarfare agent. Mm-hmm. And so pretty much human life on Earth is in peril, and what they decide to do as the last-ditch effort is to create robots which are capable of raising children who are genetically engineered to survive the pandemic. So it's about the thought process that goes into how do you create a kind of AI that has the capability of raising a human child and that will be human. And so there's the scientists in the book spend a lot of time, especially one of them who writes the code, the mother code. Mm-hmm. She's the one who really has to think, what does this mean? How am I going to do this? And it's not an android type of robot. I actually have a drawing that I like to show of it when I show, because not so people don't get the wrong idea. This is kind of what the robot looks like. This is a she can fly. The child actually, kind of lives inside of her, and she has all sorts of capabilities in order to guard and protect her child. But also she has a voice, and she and her child have a way of communicating that's very intuitive, and it's based on the neural lace concept that was put forth by Elon Musk and others. There's a lot of people out there working on this idea of brain machine interfacing. And so the child is really, really in tune with its mother in the book.
Wow, and that's set in 2049. Ryan, when are your books set?
2015, so just a few years ago.
Okay. And Joan, yours is set. Your book is set today in today's Silicon Valley, right? Oh, you're on mute. Earth to Joan, 2020 to Joan.
Pre-pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. The pandemic has really just sort of thrown authors for a loop, I have to say. Now, just saying here, every single protagonist is female, and only in fiction could we do that, right? I mean, this does not reflect reality, the reality of Silicon Valley, which continues to be kind of a really grim place for women. And I just love it that all three of you have these, I mean, it sounds like very powerful women. Although Ryan, it sounds like yours is sort of kind of what we would say in literature, a Bildungsroman for this young woman, right?
Yeah, she's on a character journey. Absolutely. She definitely, I don't want to ruin anything, but she definitely does find her way to power.
Interesting. So why and you can, whoever wants to answer, just answer, why did you think it was important that it be females at the center of your stories? Carole, yeah.
I wanted to say, although it's the Mother Code and there is a major female presence in it, it's really about a boy, and there's a main character who is a man. And so I kind of mixed it up. I have a lot of characters in my book, and you start out with a lot of men. And I think that's because I know that's the way it is. And but the a woman who ends up being the kind of main creator of the Mother Code it's lucky she's a woman, because she understands that, it's going to take more to develop something like they need to develop, because of, she has more of an intuition about it. But yeah, so I have a mix and match. It's not all about women in mine.
So does the Mother Code refer to the source code? Is that kind of what you're...
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And also there's a genetic term, Mother Code, which dates back to the 70s or 80s, which is kind of like, I think if you had, now we have the complete genome, the complete human genome, right, has been sequenced. That would be our Mother Code, and the code on which everything else is based. And so it's kind of a mixed message title. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. So Joan, tell us why you have a woman at the center.
It didn't start out that way. I don't know about my other authors here on this panel, but the book was written about 8 times. So, in one version, in an early version, the lead engineer was the main protagonist. And in one of my editing processes, an editor that I really trusted said, Hope is just way more interesting.
Hope is the name of the
Hope is my main character now. So I decided to switch it up and make it her. One thing that was interesting is that I've had the comment that you don't often see such a portrayal of unapologetically ambitious women that often in fiction. And so that was part of what I wanted to do, was show, here's a woman with the same drive as, like Carole was saying, the professors or all these men who are like, I'm going to change the world. I'm going to, make my whatever millions. And you don't often see a woman going for it that way. And some people find it unattractive, but I really liked it. And, she's a controversial character because she's very, very driven. But in the end, after she gets what she wants, she kind of warms up and changes quite a bit. So there is she is on a trajectory of that classic character development where, she starts in one place and ends in another. But she is an interesting character. She's an interesting character also because she plays in Silicon Valley, works in Silicon Valley, but she grew up on the wrong side of the tracks. She grew up in Pleasanton. And so, mon Dieu.
Can you explain why that's the wrong, where Pleasanton is?
Well, in the 60s, the Bay Area basically, the Bay Area has kind of grown from a little, tight little, let's say the peninsula and San Francisco into, a megalopolis. And so when she was growing up, it was transitioning from farm country. So, like that, provincial, I wouldn't say primitive, but provincial. And, where basically the main activities were, football in high school, but she's a math genius. So she ends up succeeding there. But there's class issues too, but I don't want to get into all that. But there are class issues about, how she is uncomfortable in Silicon Valley because people are so Ivy League-ish and, but I tell people in the beginning, it wasn't that way. In the early days, the people who were working in these big companies, Katie, you can speak to this too, but I've lived here and watched these big companies evolve. Now Google only wants Ivy Leaguers, but when Apple was first coming up, they hired the local kids who went to Cañada College and San Jose State. You didn't have to be a brain surgeon to get a job at Apple. So I found that really interesting too, that kind of evolution.
Oh yeah, that is interesting. So why did you think it was, Ryan, did you have something you wanted to add? Because I saw that your mute button was off.
Yep. When Joan's done. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
done.
Okay. She's done.
I'm done.
Anything you'd like to say about your female before I go on to the next kind of idea?
Yeah, just real quick. I loved Joan's description because my character is almost exactly the opposite. So she's kind of a rare protagonist in that she's a nurturer, right? So she's one of those people she's just trying to make the world a better place and make the people around her comfortable. And it shows in everything that she does. But she ends up being put on this path where she has to go the opposite. Instead of softening, she has to harden to do what needs to be done for basically for the good of the world. Because if she doesn't, it's basically going to fall down. So she finds herself on a very different path of learning.
That's really interesting. So I wanted to ask you, Joan, why you thought it was important to set your novel in Silicon Valley and not somewhere else.
So that really speaks to why I even bothered to write this book. Mm-hmm. Because as you know, any book is a big adventure and a commitment. What happened to me is I was working actually not in tech, but around Silicon Valley with architects and designers. So I was a business person, but not working in the tech companies. And I met Adam, who was a senior engineer, VP of engineering. And when I learned about the people that he associated with, that were his colleagues, it blew my mind. And I had to write about it because what I learned back then in '99 when we met was that these people who are making things happen in Silicon Valley are not all gearheads. And, I'm an English major, right? So it's like, Silicon Valley, that is like ultra boring. But then I meet him and I find out that these people are really polymaths and Renaissance people. And, he worked for Steve Jobs. He, as you know, worked with the people who designed the Mac. He worked with Susan Kare. He worked with all these people who were
Susan Kare. Shout out to Susan Kare. Gave us our icons. Yeah.
Who gave us the icons on the Mac. she worked at General Magic and at Apple. Anyway, I was just really, it was a big life opening, like a huge window open on, wow, this is really interesting. These people are brilliant, but they're not just brilliant in one area. They're brilliant in art, and they know about classical music, or they're musicians, and wine. And I mean, just all these interests. Anyway, I was fascinated. So it had to be set in Silicon Valley because of that, because I really wanted to place some of those characters in there.
Mm-hmm. And did you feel like you came to understand Silicon Valley better through the writing of the book?
You know, it's probably like if someone said to us, so do you understand the literary world? You know, it's like it really depends, right, where you're positioned. So my position is that I live with someone who's worked at a lot of startups and's been a VP and has had his feet in all kinds of interesting situations. But that's my little corner of Silicon Valley. Somebody might be in sales and marketing. You know what I mean? They might have a completely different view. So I'd say I understand my little piece of the world. I want to make this point. My book is actually a character. I mean, the company is a character in the book. Sorry, I misspoke. The company itself has a narrative arc. And when people finish, they're like, oh my God, I wanted to know what happened with the company. So these companies to me are so fascinating, you know, the way that they are born and grow. And a lot of people don't know that. I feel like I've done a little bit of a humanitarian service that, you know, I've let people know what goes on behind the curtain a little bit. Like, you know, here's the mystery or solved. Here's the mystery solved. Yeah.
And you, because you're set in the present, you probably wanted it to be very, and I'm speaking now as the journalist that I am, but did you want it to be very, you know, true to fact, truly representative of what really happens in, say, a Silicon Valley startup?
Yes, that was, and actually I was interviewed on NPR this summer when the book came out by Moira Gunn of Tech Nation. And one of the first things she says to me is, you know, I was afraid to read the book because I read these books and people never get it right. She goes, Joan, you got all the tech right. How did you, and she knows I'm a poet. How did you do that? I said, well, had my sources.
Oh, I know. Great.
But I did. It was important for me to get the tech right. Yeah, that was, and my husband kind of had a little finger in the book. So, you know, yeah, it was important to us. Yeah.
So, Carole, it looks like you might have something you want to say.
Oh, I guess something Joan said really rang a bell with me. I felt like the evolution of Silicon Valley since 1980. I got to see it through my husband. My husband's worked at Intel for 28 years. And I worked in a variety of, like a whole chain of startups in biotech. And you meet so many crazy people. And back in the early days of Intel, when he joined in 1978, it was the Wild West in there. It's a lot more stodgy now. I think Silicon Valley has become gentrified now compared to kind of what it was in the 80s. Definitely in the early 90s. And you can probably speak better to that than anyone, Katie. But I felt like for me to meet those kind of people, again, yeah, you're surrounded by creativity, not just gearheads, right? You're surrounded by people who are thinking about how do I get a product to people they can use and this sort of thing. And so it was, it gets both sides of your brains working.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, and you know, disagree with me if you think I'm wrong, but I would say that back in the days of, say, Intel and those folks around the semiconductor, it wasn't so much to get rich, but really, they were really fascinated by
Yeah.
the problems they were solving. That's my sense of those guys.
Totally.
Yes, and there's a guy, for example, who started Xilinx. It's a person from University of Illinois, and the ILI in the middle of it comes from Illinois. So he made a fortune, but he didn't mean to make a fortune. His whole thing was he wanted to make these certain circuit boards. That's it, and he was fascinated with that. Or the people who are fascinated with robotics or things like that, it's because they just can't stop doing it. So it is different, and it's kind of amazingly lucky when you hit it big like that and make a lot of money. But
Yeah. Carole, I wanted to ask you, I'm always fascinated by people who write science fiction and how it is that you decide the year you're going to set it in. Like what's the plausible year that you could have set this in? That
so, somebody else asked me this, and I it all went back to I'm a stickler for calendar, writing a timeline for all my characters and everything, and I wanted to make sure that none of my characters were adults now, so I wanted to put it out far enough. So for example, the main male character, one of the main male characters, is now 6 years old. He was born in 2014. I wanted them to be people who were formed kind of now. And that's really why I put it then. And strangely, I did this pandemic thing, and now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, mine is one of many books out there now that are after a pandemic. But I never mention it because I didn't know it happened. It's a kind of time warpy thing that happens. And I liked doing the world building of the future. I liked the idea of, that people were riding in auto taxis and they were communicating in ways that we haven't yet, really gotten into. It's a little more like Minority Report time, there where you're walking in a public place and advertisements are kind of beaming at you from the walls and things like that. So I like that idea. And also there's many advances that they use in the book that I think are about that far out. So the genetic engineering of fetuses, the robotics itself, AI itself, I think people will quibble with me on that, but I do think that they're about that far out, the kind of advances that I really had to have. And I'm kind of a stickler for realism, scientific realism too. I don't want to say that it happened next year and all this is possible. So it's just me, it's just me because I'm a scientist.
Well, it's so interesting you say that because there's so much hype in Silicon Valley, which is what, it's kind of famous for. And they say, oh, this is X number of years out. And so it sounds like what you're doing is really sort of realistically assessing just how far out something truly could be, right?
Yeah, I saw a lovely interview between, I think it was the Wired magazine guy, whose name I forget, was moderating, but it was at Stanford, and it was between Fei-Fei Lin, who's there at the ethics in AI, and Noah Yuval Harari. He is a futurist one of these guys who says this is all happening and we have to get ready now, and the Earth is going to, all these awful things are going to happen, and our robot overlords will take over, and Fei-Fei Lin, to her credit, she just said no. She really kind of said, no, this is it's going to take a lot longer than you think. And I wouldn't worry about it. And that's why we're thinking about the ethics of it now. That's why we're training engineers in ethics, because we want to make sure that, and I slipped a lot of those things into my book where when they're designing the mothers, they have to think about, okay, the mothers won't be able to communicate with one another. They can only communicate with their child, and that's because that robot overlord idea, or that they have certain requirements and restrictions on their behavior, and it's because it's been thought through. And I think that's the way things are turning, and I hope that they continue to turn that way.
So I have a question I'd like to throw out to all of you, which is about fiction itself. So I have to confess, I recently finished my first novel. I'm a nonfiction writer. I write narrative nonfiction. I write, 1,500 word articles for the Times. And I just decided this idea fell on my head. And my daughter was there and she turned to me and she said, "Mom, that's a novel." And I said, "Okay, I'll try that." And and it took me a few years to write. And I love the book. I love my characters. Now that I've finished it, I've missed them. But I have to tell you that I found the whole concept, being a journalist, of writing fiction, I found it at once liberating. Like, how old is she? I don't know. How old do you want her to be? Versus, running a correction because we got the age wrong. So I found it at once liberating and also paralyzing because the possibilities are endless. So I wanted to ask all of you how you do it. So you're all laughing, but you're all on mute. Yeah. So, okay, Ryan.
Sure. So I'm among other things, I'm a developer. I worked as a radiation therapist for a while, but I was also a gamer for a while. So, so a lot of times when I'm writing fiction, one of the reasons I love writing fiction is you'll hear a lot of authors say this, right? You're telling yourself a story, right? And so, what I do is just kind of, like you were saying, just not even thinking about those constraints. It's just, let's just tell a story. And if you get it wrong, the wonderful thing about fiction is you just go back and fix it. So now suddenly it's right. And in a lot of ways, it's like coding, right? You're developing this program, and if you get something wrong, fine, just go fix the other places that you broke it. But the idea is that you're continually trying to build something better, and just having that freedom to be able to create those wonderful characters, which it sounds like you did, in a fantastic story, is just the reward at the end is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Joan, what do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I would agree with that. People have asked me, as a poet, what is it like to write a novel? And I'm like, you can breathe a lot more, because talk about the compactness of a poem. What I was going to say to you when you say, how do you do it? I mean, I think most people kind of, the characters unfold and kind of tell us how to write them. So I mean, every writer I've ever talked to says that like, oh, I thought this was going to happen, but then my character just kind of went the other way. So I think there's that the book will unfold. And then the other thing is that, I don't know about the other writers, but for sure, I've written hundreds of pages that are in the garbage, hundreds, that just one editor doesn't like this, one editor doesn't like that. I mean, you're just, like you said, and I thought, and Ryan, that was really actually working on this book and watching my husband's trajectory was like, oh my God, we're doing the same thing. It's like you said, it's like coding. Just go back and fix it and take the bugs out and what isn't working and forget about the grammar and that part of it. But, I think books do unfold. I think people get intimidated. Oh, I could never write a novel. This is out of my comfort zone. But the way I wrote my first one, which is not this one, it's unpublished. It's good, but it never got published, was that my writing teacher just said, keep going with this story. And this story just kept unfolding. And so there's lots of ways to go at it, or let's say to make it manageable, for a writer to make it manageable. But still you hear, I mean, we're in the same listserv and writers community, Katie and I, and you still hear of a writer who's written 4 books and one just won't take off. They'll hit a wall. They worked hard on it. They had approvals. They but somehow it didn't all pull together. And just like a company or a code, sometimes things don't gel, right?
Carole, you,
Yeah, and along those lines, I guess the problem I had was I wrote what I thought was a pretty straightforward story, but people kept asking what's going on in the rest of the world, because this is a worldwide pandemic, and they wanted to know. So I'm like, well, I can't write, I wasn't about to write like a 400, 500 page novel. I wanted to write the heart of the story never changed. And so my problem was to keep reining it in and focusing on just what I wanted to focus on and not everything else, because there was so much. And I think I had the same problem that you just mentioned. I just kept, no, push it back down. And I went through, it took me 11 years to write it. I just way too much. And now I'm writing another novel, and what I'm making sure to do is to keep a very narrow focus in it. And so with a smaller cast of characters, fewer people involved, so that I can really delve into each character more closely and not get too distracted by what's going on over here and over there, which was a huge problem during the process of writing the first novel. I just, I wasn't a writer, so what did I know? So I just.
So is your new one also set in the future?
Yeah, I'm a future person. I like to write.
I'm for the future. I'm in favor of the future, of a future.
Yeah.
Joan,
any future.
We'll take
did
it.
You, Ryan, did anyone have anything they wanted to add to that? I wanted to ask you guys if you have heard of any of these books, Silicon Valley novels. This one looks kind of interesting, The Big Disruption by Jessica Powell. She used to be, I think, the Google head of PR. No. How about this one, Sophia of Silicon Valley? It sounds like my friend Flicka, but so no, okay, by Anna Yen. And the other one I found was called After On in 2017. Rob Reed. All of these are in the last few years. Now I'm kind of caught the bug, so to speak, and I think I might like to. I don't know. Lately, I take it back. Lately, I've just been wanting to read the classics. I don't know why. I don't know what's wrong with me, but for some reason, I mean, what do you guys read? What do you read in order to write? That's going to be my last question for you guys. Carole, you look like
I really like to read science fiction, but I like to read what I would call literary science fiction. So one I just finished was called Migrations by Charlotte McConaughey, and she's Australian but Irish descent, and it's about a species disappearing from the earth, and it's just beautifully written. It's beautifully written, and when I run across a science fiction that's beautifully written, that's what I really, really gobble up. And so I think that would be my favorite go-to thing. And the thing is that I like about science fiction is it just allows me to get out of what's going on now and dream about possibilities in other worlds.
Interesting, because science fiction, sometimes it's just so dark. Like I'm thinking Fahrenheit 451. I mean, that just seems.
I'm not a big fan of that one.
You're not. Yeah.
I don't like dystopian.
Yeah.
So mine is post-apocalyptic, but strangely not dystopian. So
I love that line. Wait a minute. Mine is post-apocalyptic, but not dystopian.
It happens after apocalypse, but it's hopeful. So it's about people with hope.
What about you guys?
Ryan?
Oh, sure. So I think I tend to prefer either the epic fantasies or urban fantasies where You have I mean I really get into the characters. I love it when you've got a nice protagonist or a set of characters, and you get to go on a journey with them over many novels, and you get to see them evolve, not just over the space of a novel, but over the space of 5 or 6 or 7, and just see them just completely break out of their shells and become something even they never imagined they would. So I think that's what really draws me in and keeps me motivated.
Mm-hmm. So give us an example of anything that you.
Actually, so some of the more popular urban fantasies right now by Patricia Briggs and Ilona Andrews. I think they've got some wonderful things. My biggest inspiration, probably no surprise, George R.R. Martin. I think his books are just brilliant. The characters and the plots, they're all woven, and again he takes his time. Not just with the writing, but with the telling.
Interesting. So, Joan, give us your go-tos.
It's interesting. I think because I'm a poet, and so to me, the most interesting thing is language. So I'm always picking writers that really float my boat with language. And so I'd say, Richard Powers, his new book is The Overstory, which a lot of people are reading about saving the redwood forests. But his book about his biracial family in the 60s and the Civil War and the Civil Rights Movement.
Right. And here's a Richard.
Called The Time of Our Singing. Oh, yeah. Yes. Those I never actually got into, but he has kind of more straight up narrative fiction. You love that? You love that one. Yeah. I've read some nonfiction about Silicon Valley, like, Bad Blood, which I'm sure everybody's taken a look at. When Carole, right? When Carole said that a lot of the inventors and innovators that she's come across didn't go with the intention of getting rich. That was a byproduct. And I was really had to hold myself back from saying, oh yeah, and here that woman, her main goal
I was thinking the exact same thing.
Right? Yeah. And she failed.
Right. So we have about 1 or 2 minutes left. So Carole, it looks like you might want to say something.
Just real quick. I loved Bad Blood and I lived Bad Blood. Many of my friends worked at Theranos. I knew like half the characters in that book. So it was really spooky reading it, but it was very well written.
So well done. Such a tour de force. Well, I would like to thank all of you. This has been so much fun. So Carole Stivers, Ryan Southwick, and Joan Gelfand, thank you so much for being on this panel. It was just really great. So goodbye, everybody out there. Oh, yeah. My pleasure.
Thanks for hosting.
All right, our book.
Hold up our book.
Our book.
Oh, yay.
No books. I have no book to hold up.